Hey guys, tonight we're rowing gently into a garden that floats, not on imagination, but on mud, reeds, and centuries of quiet genius. No wheels, no roads, just drifting plots of land that somehow feed an empire. We're spending the night on an Aztec chinampa, a floating garden, and trust me, it's not your typical Airbnb. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is right now. I always love seeing how far this little nighttime boat floats. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up to the sound of water gently lapping against woven reed walls. At first, you're not sure where you are. The bed feels solid but slightly soft underneath, and the air smells like damp earth, lake lilies, and smoke from a distant cooking fire. You sit up and look around. And then you remember, you're on a chinampa, a floating plot of land in the heart of the Valley of Mexico. Built not with concrete or bricks, but with patience, sticks, and genius. There's no loud city traffic, no ringing phones. Just waterbirds arguing in the reeds and a paddle dipping quietly somewhere far off. The surface you slept on is a mixture of soft soil, woven willow roots, and carefully piled mud. To your left, rows of amaranth and maize stretch in neat lines, their tips catching the early light like tiny spears of gold. To your right, squash vines spill lazily over the edge, their leaves flicking dew into the canal below. This isn't a garden built on water. This is a village with water in its bones. You step out carefully, though honestly, you don't need to. The chinampa is more stable than it looks. These things don't drift. They're anchored deep into the lakebed with weighty tree stakes, and the root systems intertwine like fingers under the soil. It's part island, part sponge, and it's been here longer than you'd believe. Some of these floating fields are older than the cities you know. And yet, no matter how many times you walk across one, it still feels like a miracle. You walk to the edge and squat down. The canal water is calm and dark, filled with nutrients from years of decaying plant matter. Aztecs called this chinampa soup. You dip your fingers in. Cool, silky, alive. Someone from the next plot over waves at you. He's already up, tending to a row of chili peppers. No alarm clocks here. Just sunlight, rhythm, and ducks that refuse to respect boundaries. Breakfast. You'll likely help cook it. A bit of lake fish, maybe roasted over coals with some wild greens wrapped in maguey leaves. If you're lucky, there'll be sweet tamales made with honey from stingless bees and a sprinkle of crushed pumpkin seed. As you walk the edge of the plot, you notice how every corner seems to have a purpose. Here a space for herbs, there a willow tree planted to strengthen the edge. Even the narrow walkways are layered with mud, ash, and thyme, making sure the whole thing breathes without ever falling apart. And the best part, you don't just live on a chinampa. You live with it. Every step you take adds weight to the soil. Every planting season feeds not just your stomach, but the very island under your feet. The plot is alive, and it remembers you. Historians still debate whether chinampas were true floating gardens, or just supersaturated artificial islands. Some say they were tethered, others say they moved with the currents. But here, standing barefoot in the misty morning quiet, you don't care about the argument. Because the earth doesn't feel like it's floating. It feels like it's holding you. And as you stretch, yawn, and begin the day with mud between your toes and sunlight on your face, you realize something. You didn't just wake up on a chinampa. You woke up inside a world where gardening and architecture and family and time all float together. You're kneeling in wet soil now, elbows deep in a pile of lake mud, and your guide, an elder with arms like tree trunks and a laugh that sounds like rain on leaves, grins at you. You want to eat, you build your ground first. Tonight, you're learning how to make something that shouldn't exist. Land. Out of water. Because chinampas aren't just floating gardens, they're human-made islands, crafted from mud, reeds, and the kind of patience only found in civilizations that count time in crop cycles, not minutes. It starts with a spot in a shallow lake. You push long wooden stakes into the lakebed, forming a rectangular frame, like you're building a raft, but with the intent to grow squash on it. Then comes the layering: mud dredged from the lake bottom, dead plants, more mud, reeds, ash, and repeat. The result: a raised bed that floats, not like a boat, but like a swamp that knows what it's doing. You walk alongside one in progress. It smells like compost and cool water. The outer edges are lined with willow saplings, which over time will root and anchor the entire island. That's the genius of it: these islands aren't free-floating. They're stitched into the lake itself. And they grow stronger the more you use them. You help shovel black, silty mud into place. It's heavy, but it holds nutrients like a sponge. Someone behind you tosses in shredded aquatic plants to help it breathe. It's like baking a cake with ingredients stolen from a wetland. You pause, back aching just a little, and glance around. All across the water, other chinampas are in different stages of life. Some fresh and marshy, others lush and bursting with maize and beans, their neat rows making them look like floating quilts. In the distance, you hear kids shouting from a canoe, probably on their way to collect lake lettuce or check their family's duck traps. You smile. Building a chinampa isn't a job. It's a craft, a ritual, a negotiation between water, earth, and human stubbornness. And the Aztecs weren't the first to figure it out. Historians suggest the practice may go back to earlier Mesoamerican cultures, like the Zacamilca, who looked at a swamp and saw not a problem, but a farm. Some scholars debate whether the original chinampas actually floated at all. Many now argue they were more like raised plots in marshlands than boats. But the truth is probably somewhere in between. Because when you stand here, knee-deep in muck, trying to pat down a corner of this still soggy soil bed, you realize something. It feels like floating, but it works like land. And as you place the final layer of reeds and step back, hands filthy and heart surprisingly light, the elder slaps you on the back. Now it's yours. You built it. Feed it. Let it feed you. And just like that, your feet aren't on water anymore. They're on something earned. Something alive. You curl up beside a squash vine, the sky fading into a soft violet wash above your head, and for a moment you wonder if it's normal to feel this calm while lying on something that technically shouldn't exist. Welcome to bedtime on a chinampa, where the dirt is warm, the water hums like a lullaby, and the leaves rustle like they're trying to tell you stories they heard from the wind. Tonight, you're learning what it's like to sleep beside the squash vines, because on these floating gardens, farming isn't something you leave behind at sunset. It surrounds you. It rocks you to sleep. Your little hut is made of woven reeds and mud-plastered wood, perched right on the edge of the garden. There's no door. Just a flap of cloth that lets in moonlight and the occasional curious mosquito. Your bed. A mat of tightly rolled reeds, surprisingly comfy once you stop resisting and let your bones flatten out. Above your head, you've tied a bundle of drying herbs, episode, hoja santa, wormseed, not just for flavor, but for dreams. Or so your neighbor swears. You close your eyes and listen. Somewhere, a frog croaks. A fish jumps in the canal. A paddle glides by, someone returning late from trading night fruit under the moon. And all around you, plants keep doing what they do best, growing quietly. Corn stalks stretch an extra half-inch. Bean vines wrap just a little tighter around their poles. Squash blossoms unfurl slowly, like they're yawning. Even the soil keeps working, wet, layered, breathing through thousands of tiny organisms. It doesn't sleep. Not really. And neither does the chinampa. You think back to something your guide said earlier. Sleep close to your roots, she told you, and they'll teach you what patience feels like. You didn't understand it at the time. But now, feeling the gentle pulse of the earth beneath you, alive, quiet, always busy, you get it. This isn't just land. It's company. Historians say chinampas supported some of the densest populations in the pre-colonial Americas, in part because families didn't live near their farms, they lived on them. Gardens weren't commutes. They were homes. And yes, it meant muddy feet. It meant pulling weeds before breakfast. but it also meant waking up to birds nesting in the maize. It meant napping under a squash leaf the size of your torso. Some nights, elders would tell stories right out in the fields. Kids would fall asleep on baskets of tomatoes. Dogs would curl up beside the chili plants like furry scarecrows. Even lovers, according to one old tale, would carve initials into tree trunks mid-harvest. Because the chinampa didn't just grow food. It held life. You roll onto your side, the cool air brushing your cheek, the scent of wet earth and sweet leaves wrapping around you like a blanket. Somewhere nearby, a duck quacks once, decides it's not worth it, and settles back down. And slowly, gently, you drift. Cradled not by a mattress or a house, but by soil, by vines, by water. And somehow, despite the frogs, the bugs, the bamboo creaks, and your slightly itchy foot, you sleep better than you ever have. You wake to ripples. Not waves, not splashes, just a slow, steady rhythm brushing the chinampa's edge like fingers tapping on a drum. The light is still soft, somewhere between sunrise and should I get up yet? And the air is cool enough that you pull your shawl tighter, but warm enough to smell the sweet musk of dew on the corn. Today, you're not looking at clocks. You're reading the water. Because on a chinampa, time doesn't tick. It flows. This morning, you're learning how the water becomes a clock, how the Aztecs and earlier Chinampa cultures measured time not in hours, but in rhythm. The way birds sing, the way shadows fall, the way lake mist lifts like a curtain on a stage. You squint across the canal. There, on the eastern plot, a row of willows leans ever so slightly toward you. Your guide points at the shadows they cast. When the shadow touches that stump, she says, it's time to feed the ducks. When it touches the pole, it's time to check the beans. No sundials, no bells, just trees, and watching them very, very closely. Back on your chinampa, you crouch to watch the canal water again. It has its moods. This early in the day, it's glass still, perfect for spotting fish or dropping a net. But soon, it'll begin to twitch as the morning breeze stirs. By mid-morning, you'll know it's time to rest when the lily pads drift in slow circles. In fact, the entire day is divided less by numbers and more by natural cues. When the dragonflies vanish, it's time to retreat from the sun. When the herons gather, it's time to prepare for rain. When the bees swarm the chili flowers, you know you're late for weeding. It's not just poetic. It's practical. In a world without wristwatches or phone alarms, people here become fluent in rhythm. Some historians call it indigenous environmental awareness. Others say it was just a matter of necessity. When your farm floats, you pay attention. But your guide says it differently. You learn to read the world. Like a friend, not a clock. You take a seat near a patch of marigolds, their bright yellow petals glowing in the morning light. A small child paddles past with a basket of fresh herbs balanced on her head. She doesn't say a word, just smiles, nods, and floats on. Even the people move with rhythm here. By late afternoon, the shadows will be long again, curling up the stalks of maize. Someone will whistle from the far end of the water, signaling it's time to bring in the canoes. And by dusk, the frogs will sing exactly on cue. It's not a schedule. It's a conversation with nature, slow, patient, sometimes interrupted by a duck fight, but always coming back into rhythm. You walk to the far edge of the chinampa and dip your hand in the canal again. Cool, smooth, familiar. Not a clock, but definitely a keeper of time. You're kneeling between rows of corn now, shoes off, knees muddy, face warmed by the mid-morning sun. The leaves whisper gently in the breeze, and somewhere behind you, a gourd gives a quiet plop into the canal. But you're not alone out here. To your left, an older woman, your guide's aunt, maybe grandmother, definitely boss of this particular chinampa, leans in close to a stalk of maize, cups her hands around the base, and says something softly. You pause. Did she just talk to the plant? Yes, she did. Because here, you're about to meet the farmer who talks to maize. And, apparently, the maize listens. She sees your raised eyebrow and waves you over. Listen with your hands, she says, pressing your fingers to the stalk. Feel how warm it is. That means it's drinking well. You nod slowly, like you know what that means. You don't. But it feels good to pretend. And then she starts talking, not to you, but to the plants. Quiet words. Gentle words. A mixture of Nahuatl phrases and humming that isn't quite a tune but definitely isn't random. A rhythm. A comfort. She does this with every third plant. Why? Well, you're told, those are the ones who seem a little shy today. You're beginning to see that Chinampa farming isn't just work. It's relationship. Historians agree that the Aztecs cultivated maize with incredible precision, using crop rotation, intercropping with beans and squash, three sisters, and leveraging the nutrient-rich lake soil. But what textbooks often skip is the emotional side. Many Chinampa farmers believed maize had a spirit. Not metaphorically. Literally. A presence that needed care, respect, and, sometimes, a little conversation. And it wasn't just maize. You hear stories of farmers asking chili plants to behave, no burning today, please. Of people apologizing to squash for stepping on their vines, of families leaving tiny offerings at the edge of the Chinampa before the first harvest. One farmer even claims her amaranth grows faster if she tells it dreams she had during the rainy season. Modern agriculturalists call this superstition. But, honestly, their corn looks amazing. And as you sit in the shade of a tall stalk, watching this quiet ritual of murmured encouragements and gentle pruning, you realize something. This isn't weird. It's intimate. When your food grows 10 feet from your bed, you notice things. You notice how one plant droops on hot days. How another leans toward its sibling. How this chili bush never does well unless the ducks pass by twice a day. It's not just gardening. It's companionship. And here's the thing. It works. Even in seasons of drought, these Chinampas keep producing, fed by lake water, aerated by root systems, and encouraged by people who talk like the plants are part of the family. There's an ongoing academic debate about how spiritual these farming practices truly were, whether the rituals were religious or just habit. But standing here, fingers resting on warm, humming soil, you realize. Does it matter? You whisper something to the maize beside you, just to try. It doesn't answer. But the leaves seem to shift slightly toward the sound of your voice. You're sitting in a narrow canoe now, flat-bottomed, worn smooth by years of paddles, and just wide enough to keep your knees from knocking together. In front of you, a young boy about 8 years old is steering with a paddle twice his size. He doesn't say much. He doesn't need to. This, apparently, is your ride. Because on a Chinampa, the canoe isn't a boat. It's the family car. You're off on a supply run, at least that's what you're told, but already you've made 3 detours, one to drop off tamales to someone's cousin, another to deliver a basket of marigolds to a floating shrine, and a third because someone's duck escaped and decided to stow away with you. You don't mind. The canals are calm, the morning sun is slanting through willow branches, and the air smells like lake water and something delicious 2 plots over. The boy shifts the paddle and you glide past another Chinampa, this one covered in flowers, bright orange simpasicil, white lilies, spiky red dahlias. An old woman sits in the middle, weaving garlands. She waves. You wave back. This is just traffic here. You pass other canoes too, a man balancing clay pots stacked to the sky, a girl with baskets of beans, 2 teens arguing loudly over who gets to steer next. There are no honks. No speed limits. Just the occasional splash when someone misjudges a turn. And everything moves. Not fast. Not slow. Just in rhythm. You turn to your guide, who's sunbathing in the back like this is the world's most chill Uber ride. So what happens if the canal dries up? She opens one eye. It doesn't. If it does, the plants tell us first. Ah, of course they do. Historically, these canal networks were the arteries of Tenochtitlán, the great Aztec capital, and the surrounding agricultural zones. They carried not just goods, but news, culture, ceremonies, relationships. A floating community wasn't just about planting things, It was about staying connected. And Chinampa families often owned multiple plots, sometimes spread across different parts of the lake, so canoes were essential. Kids learned to steer them almost before they could walk. Grandparents used them to visit friends, deliver herbs, and sometimes just take a slow afternoon loop for no reason at all. You look at your hands. The paddle is smooth, heavy. You try rowing. The canoe swerves wildly left, crashes softly into a lily patch, and the boy finally speaks. Stick to floating. Fair enough. There's a theory among some historians that the entire Chinampa system worked not just because of its physical design, but because of mobility. Canoes made everything reachable. Food could be moved. People could help each other. Floating meant flexibility. You drift past a small shrine balanced on the edge of a Chinampa. Someone's left a flower, a fruit, a carved gourd with incense still curling out of it. You think about how many things have floated here. Goods, stories, laughter, ducks, dreams. And then, as if perfectly timed, a heron lifts off from the canal beside you, its wings slicing through the sunlight like slow silver scissors. The boy paddles on, silent, content. And you realize, you're not just traveling through a village. Smoke curls from a clay stove balanced near the Chinampa's edge, and your nose twitches before your stomach even gets the memo. Something spicy, something sweet, something a little like roasted lake and childhood. You're helping make breakfast, or at least, you're pretending to. Because this morning, it's time to learn the art of cooking with lake mud and chili smoke. Your guide crouches beside the stove, expertly flipping small cakes made of amaranth and mashed sweet corn. The edges sizzle, the smell is glorious, and the ducks nearby are definitely hoping something falls. On Chinampas, cooking is part of the rhythm of the land. There are no separate kitchens, everything happens right where it grows. You help peel a roasted chili. It's still hot, and the smoke makes your eyes water, but the flavor? Tangy, deep, a little dangerous. It's paired with grilled fish from the canal, caught earlier by a kid in a canoe who looked about 12 and far more competent than you. Beside the fire, there's a pot of lake mud, drying in the sun. No, it's not for eating, you hope, but it is for sealing a cracked cooking pot and also for filtering water when the lake gets murky. Mud, it turns out, is very versatile. Today's meal includes a squash blossom tamales steamed in reed bundles, a nopal cactus strips fried with chili oil, and a small bowl of crushed pumpkin seeds and honey for dipping. Yes, that's your dessert. And yes, it's delicious. The fire burns low, fueled by dried maize husks and the occasional splintered canoe paddle past its prime. You learn to roast seeds until they pop. You grind them with a volcanic stone matate, your arms quickly aching in that very humbling, "This looks easy until I try it" way. You're corrected twice on your stirring speed. And when you finally get it right, you're given the very high honor of wrapping a tamale in soaked leaves, without ripping them. It mostly holds together. Cooking on a Chinampa is a performance, a quiet one, full of gestures and glances. Nobody shouts. Nobody measures. Everything is felt. The texture of the dough. The smell of the fire. The way the wind tells you it's going to rain before your chili paste thickens. And here's the wild part. You're told that some meals are cooked not just for taste, but to thank the Chinampa itself. Offerings are left. Seeds, flowers, a splash of broth. Not because the garden demands it, but because gratitude is part of the recipe. Historians argue whether these offerings were spiritual or symbolic, whether cooking by the fields was necessity or culture. But here, wiping chili paste off your elbow with a corn husk, you're starting not to care about the academic side. Because the emotional side is obvious. This food tastes like belonging. You take a bite of the tamale. Soft, earthy, just a little spicy. There's a smear of honey pumpkin paste on the side. You drag your finger through it. A duck honks indignantly. You ignore him. You're busy. Because this morning, breakfast isn't just food. A splash behind you. Then, another. You turn, expecting fish, or maybe another duck uprising. But no, it's a toddler. Completely naked, laughing so hard he can't breathe, paddling through the canal like he was born with fins. His older sister watches from the Chinampa, holding a dripping basket of greens and rolling her eyes like this happens every day. It does. Welcome to the world of children who swim before they walk. This morning, you're not planting or harvesting. You're babysitting, sort of. Mostly, you're just trying to keep up with a group of kids who seem to consider floating villages the world's best playground. You watch as one leaps from the edge of a plot straight into the canal with perfect form. Another climbs up a tree growing out of the side of a chinampa to spy on a heron nesting nearby. A third. She's making a raft out of pumpkin vines and chewing on something that looks like a lily root. You're impressed and mildly alarmed, but no one else seems concerned. Your guide chuckles. We don't teach them to swim. We just don't stop them. Children here are amphibious by default. The canals are their front yards, highways, and splash pads all in one. Before they can walk with confidence, they're already familiar with the temperature of the water, the feel of wet roots underfoot, and the proper technique for duck evasion. And it's not just play. They help gather floating vegetation for compost. They learn which plants sting and which don't. One child proudly shows you how to identify a frog's nest, then promptly tries to make a new friend out of a fish he found. You're informed the fish's name is Señor Burrito. You roll with it. Historians talk a lot about chinampas in terms of agriculture, economics, and innovation. But rarely do they mention how deeply child-friendly the whole ecosystem was. The plots are small, familiar, rich with color and texture. There are jobs just the right size for little hands, sorting seeds, plucking herbs, delivering snacks to grandmas sunbathing in the shade. And always, the water is close. Close enough to cool off in, play in, and even learn from. Children are taught to read the water, to know its moods, to sense when it's too fast, too cold, too full of silt. One boy tells you he can tell when rain is coming just by how the lake smells different. You believe him. And there are rules, of course. Elders watch from shady spots. Older siblings are unofficial lifeguards. And if someone does fall in where they shouldn't, well, someone else is already paddling over with a net and a snack to fix it. There's a trust here. Not recklessness, just belief that the land, the water, and the people will hold you. And they do. You sit back now, watching the kids climb into a canoe, arguing over whose turn it is to paddle. They're soaked, muddy, loud, glowing with sun, and utterly at home. And as the toddler belly flops one more time with a squeal and a splash, you think, maybe floating villages weren't just built to grow food. Maybe they were built to grow humans who remember how to move with the earth, not against it. You're holding a bundle of soggy weeds and chasing a duck with absolutely no respect for your authority. It honks. You shout. It honks louder. This is your morning now. Because today, you're stepping into the real heartbeat of Chinampa life, the daily loop of weeding, gossiping, and duck herding. Let's be honest, Chinampas are beautiful, serene, floating gardens, but they're also high-maintenance drama queens. These plots need constant care, not because they're fragile, but because they never stop growing. And that includes things you don't want. You're knee-deep in creeping vines that showed up overnight like they paid rent. The older women nearby are already halfway through their weeding row, chatting the whole time about everything from moon cycles to someone's cousin's questionable chili stew recipe. You try to listen while yanking at something suspiciously thorny. One woman pauses to sip from a gourd of pulque and gestures at the weeds. If they're growing fast, the corn will follow. That's oddly optimistic. As you move down the row, you realize the weeds aren't the only thing that need managing. The ducks. Oh, the ducks. They're not yours. They belong to the Chinampa family next door. But today they've decided your chili plot is their favorite brunch buffet. One waddles straight up to your basket of marigolds and stares you down, daring you to interfere. You wave a stick. It blinks slowly and takes a nap instead. Duck herding, it turns out, is a subtle dance. You don't chase them. You negotiate. You leave a trail of grain leading them elsewhere, gently block the entrances to forbidden rows, and sometimes, you just bribe them. A small child hands you a handful of cornmeal. This usually works, unless they're in a mood. Fair. All of this, pulling weeds, steering ducks, listening to gossip you only half understand, feels mundane at first. But after an hour, it starts to take on rhythm. Weed. Gossip. Duck. Weed. Gossip. Duck. Someone laughs. Someone sings an old song about a man who married a Chinampa and had corn for children. You're not sure if it's a joke or a folktale. Maybe both. Historians often overlook this part of Chinampa life. They focus on the engineering, the trade, the genius of agricultural productivity. But the maintenance, the daily tending, that's what kept the whole system alive. Without it, weeds choke the soil. Ducks destroy the seedlings. The water turns sluggish. The floating garden becomes a floating mess. But with care, with hands in the soil and laughter in the air, it thrives. And maybe the weeding isn't just about plants. Maybe it's also how people process grief, share stories, teach lessons. One elder mutters to the weeds like they're misbehaving children. Another thanks them before pulling them. You're told never to remove them in silence. Even weeds listen, someone says. By midday, your hands are muddy, your back is sore, and the ducks have finally wandered off, probably to terrorize someone else's spinach. You sit on a basket, wipe your forehead, and feel weirdly satisfied. You didn't do anything heroic. But you kept the garden alive today. That counts for something. The scent of marigolds hits you before you even dock the canoe. Bright, peppery, almost citrusy, with a hint of something older, like sun-warmed wood or the memory of last year's rain. You round the corner and suddenly the entire Chinampa ahead of you is gold. Not just planted, but woven, bundled, strung, stacked. It's like a flower explosion had a party and forgot to clean up. Today, you're helping prepare for a floating shrine, and that means learning how, and why, the flowers mean business. Your guide is already there, waist deep in marigold stems, her arms full of blossoms. She waves you over and hands you a bundle so big you can't see over it. You're on garland duty. Try not to sneeze on anything sacred. Right. The floating shrine is a small canoe, decorated with woven palm mats, dyed cloth, and carved wooden figures representing Tenochtitlán, the goddess of beauty, fertility, and flowers. She likes color. She likes scent. And she loves a good entrance. Your job. Make her ride look fabulous. As you work, looping garlands through the boat's side rails, you learn that Chinampa communities held regular ceremonies like this. Floating shrines that drifted along the canals, carrying music, offerings, and wishes. Each one was a kind of traveling temple, where people would whisper prayers from the shore or paddle out to leave a gift. Some gave flowers. Some gave food. Some gave tiny paper dolls with their hopes written inside. And yes, there was always a lot of marigold. Why marigolds? Because they're bright, abundant, and believed to guide the spirits. Their scent cuts through the fog, through time, through memory. Even today, they're a key part of Dia de los Muertos, helping souls find their way. You pause to admire your handiwork. Your garland is a little crooked, one side puffier than the other. Your guide leans in, nods solemnly. Tenochtitlán will think it's charming. You're not sure if that's praise or a gentle roast. Either way, you'll take it. Nearby, others prepare offerings. Small cakes made with amaranth and honey. Bundles of herbs tied with red thread. Tiny clay figurines painted with natural dyes. Each item is placed carefully into the boat, every object holding meaning, every arrangement telling a story. Some historians debate how widespread these rituals were. Were they personal or state-sponsored? Were they symbolic or actively spiritual? But standing here, fingers stained orange with petals, watching people handle each flower like it's something sacred, you stop caring about academic certainty. Because this feels real. And not in the loud, dramatic way. In the quiet, flutter in your stomach kind of way. Finally, the boat is ready. Candles flicker. Incense curls up like smoke signals to the gods. Someone begins to hum. The shrine is pushed off gently into the canal, and it floats forward, slow, glowing, alive. People bow their heads. Some whisper. Some just watch. You sit on the edge of the Chinampa, knees pulled to your chest, petals stuck in your hair, and watch the goddess glide away on a bed of blossoms. And for a moment, the floating village feels like a world between land and water, between work and worship, between now and something older. You breathe in the scent of marigolds, and you let it carry you. Your hands are yellow again, not from pollen this time, but from crushing another basket of marigold petals into dye. You've been at it for nearly an hour, and the color still won't quite stick to the cloth the way your guide's does. She watches from a shady spot nearby, sipping something cool and slightly green. You have to ask the flowers first, she says, not unkindly. You blink. Ask them what? She grins. Ask if they want to be useful today. Right. Because here in the Chinampa world, even flowers have opinions, and especially when it comes to their most important side hustle, trade. Today's lesson? How flowers meant business. You always thought of marigolds as decorative. You know, graveyard blooms, Instagram fodder. But here, their currency, message, medicine, and spiritual concierge, all rolled into one. The family you're staying with dedicates 2 whole Chinampas to nothing but flowers. Rows of marigolds, dahlias, lilies, and even sempasicil grow in loose lines across the floating plots like paint spilled across soil. And they don't just look pretty. They sell. Early in the morning, a cousin took the canoe to the market at Xochimilco, his boat piled high with garlands, wrapped stems, bundles tied with corn husk ribbons. He'll trade those flowers for salt, obsidian tools, fermented drinks, maybe even chocolate paste if he plays his cards right. The demand is high. Why? Because flowers are more than aesthetics. They have meaning. Yellow marigolds equals spiritual guidance. Red dahlias equals fire and passion. White lilies equals cleansing and peace. Purple varieties equals royalty or mourning. Depending on what you're celebrating or surviving, you pick accordingly. You ask your guide if anyone ever just grows them for fun. She snorts. That's like planting corn and not eating it. So you help harvest. You learn to cut stems at an angle, wrap them quickly in wet cloth, and never, ever trample the seedlings. A girl no older than 8 shows you how to twist 2 vines into a headband, the petals resting right at the temples. She wears it like it's battle armor. It's for my aunt's wedding, she says. And suddenly the whole Chinampa smells like hope. There's a debate among historians about whether flower production on Chinampas was purely religious or part of a growing market economy. But your knees are in the dirt, and your hands are full of dye, and you can tell. It's both. You're told there were once floating flower festivals, where entire sections of the lake turned into moving tapestries of petals and songs. Canoes would glide through narrow canal paths strewn with blossoms, each boat carrying music, prayers, or gifts for the gods. You try to imagine it. You don't have to try very hard. Later that day, the cousin returns from market with a lopsided grin and a pouch of sweet tamarind. Everyone cheers. He brought back twice what they expected. He holds up a garland that didn't sell, half crushed, slightly wilted, and tosses it to you. For your head, he says. You wear it for the rest of the afternoon, even as the petals crumble and cling to your hair. Because here, flowers aren't just beautiful, they're powerful. And they've got jobs to do. Night comes quietly on the Chinampa. No streetlights, no hum of traffic, just the gentle glimmer of stars reflecting in the canal and the occasional splash of something, or someone, moving through the water. You wrap a shawl around your shoulders and settle in near the maize stalks, watching shadows stretch long across the rows. And then someone hands you a torch. It's your turn. Tonight, you're on night watch duty, because even floating villages need someone to keep an eye out when the world goes dim. You're not alone. 4 of you are on shift, a teenager who keeps yawning, a grandmother who brought a basket of snacks and zero tolerance for nonsense, and your guide, who insists that rain can be smelled 10 minutes before it arrives, if you pay attention. You believe her. Your job is simple. Listen, observe, and, if needed, wake the people who actually know what to do. And there's a lot to listen for. You learn that frogs croak louder when rain is coming. That the owls call out in a particular rhythm when wind changes. That ducks don't quack, exactly, they grumble when they sense a predator in the reeds. But your favorite? The stars. Your guide points out Citlalin Popoca, the smoking star, and tells you it rises just before the maize tassels burst open. Another cluster is used to mark the perfect time for transplanting chili seedlings. And one faint, blinking star? That one lies, she says. Never trust it. Noted. Tonight, you're watching for Tlaloc signs, god of rain, lord of lakes and lightning. Sometimes he sends advance notice in the wind. Other times, his messages arrive as a prickling feeling behind the ears. You ask how that works. The grandmother pops a roasted seed in her mouth and shrugs. You'll know. Scholars have long debated how the Aztecs predicted weather. Some credit careful sky observation, others point to ritual divination. But Chinampa farmers didn't see a divide between science and spirit. The sky was their clock, their calendar, their community bulletin board, and sometimes their trickster uncle who liked surprise storms. And when you live on floating land, rain isn't just wet. It's everything. Too little, and the canals shrink. Too much, and your chili plants drown. A single flash flood could wash away a poorly anchored plot. So people learned to read the night. You walk the perimeter of the Chinampa with your little torch, watching mist rise from the canal like steam from a quiet kitchen. The air smells of wet leaves and warm soil. You pause. Somewhere in the distance, you hear singing, low, slow, almost like a lullaby. You turn, but the others don't react. They've heard it before. Probably a boat coming in late, someone mutters. But you swear it came from the water itself. You sit again and tilt your head back. The stars are brighter now, and it's easier to see how they dance just slightly in the canal's reflection. Everything above is mirrored below. And for a moment, it feels like you're floating not between garden rows, but between worlds. The soil beneath you, the sky above you, the water around you, and time itself, just a ripple. You blink, and realize the grandmother fell asleep holding a gourd of tamales. The teenagers snoring softly into a blanket of maize husks. Your guide is still watching the sky, and you don't feel tired at all. You feel tuned in, because some places don't need walls to feel like home. Some just need stars, a little smoke, and the quiet promise of rain. It's just before dawn now, and the world around you is painted in soft blues and silvers. You're sitting cross-legged on the Chinampa, watching steam rise off the canal like the lake itself is stretching awake. The others are still asleep, or pretending to be, but the soil under your feet? It's already working. Because here's the quiet truth no one really says out loud. The Chinampa never sleeps. Even when the people do. You walk barefoot along the edge of the garden. The ground is still damp from the night's mist, and as you crouch to touch it, you can feel it, warmth. Beneath that layer of mud and mulch, there's life. Worms, roots, fungi, water. It's like someone left the engine running all night. Your guide joins you, yawning into her sleeve. You want to know the secret, she says. It's not us keeping the garden alive. It's the garden keeping us. She pulls up a small square of soil, just a few inches, and shows you the cross-section. You see, a soft top layer of fresh compost. Older reeds and stalks decomposing beneath. Pockets of rich, dark lake mud. And thin white roots weaving it all together like thread. It's a layer cake of regeneration. This is how Chinampas work. They rebuild themselves, slowly, patiently, constantly. As long as you add new material on top, the lower layers break down and turn into more food, more structure, more magic. Some historians compare it to a compost heap. Others say it's more like a living sponge. But no matter what you call it, the fact remains, these floating gardens have been growing themselves for centuries. And they don't stop when the sun sets. You pass by a corner where someone recently harvested squash. In its place, new seedlings are already poking through the mulch. A pile of kitchen scraps waits nearby, corn husks, flower stems, the remains of last night's tamales. Nothing is wasted. Everything returns. Even the canal water feeds the garden. Every time it floods, it leaves behind nutrients. Every paddle stroke stirs silt. Even the ducks, chaotic as they are, fertilize as they wander. You think about modern farming, with its machines, its chemicals, its breaks between seasons. Then you look at this Chinampa, quiet, warm, breathing like an animal in deep sleep. And you realize, this is farming without stopping. But also, without stress. Because it's built to keep going. Not just with effort, but with trust. You sit at the base of a willow tree, watching a single droplet of dew slide down a leaf and fall into the soil. It disappears instantly, like the garden just drank it. People think these things float on water, your guide says, sitting beside you. But they really float on time. That line sits in your chest for a while. Because she's right. This isn't land. It's memory. Of harvests. Of storms. Of hands pressing seeds into soil and coming back months later for tomatoes, chilies, and stories. You lie back, eyes open, listening to the rustle of leaves and the soft hiss of water against the roots. You breathe in. The Chinampa exhales. And somewhere between the weeds and the worms, you understand what it means to belong to something that never sleeps. The sun's fully up now, and you're paddling again, this time with a much sturdier sense of direction and only half as many duck-related detours. Your guide sits behind you in the canoe, gently correcting your paddle strokes and throwing casual commentary over your shoulder like, "Don't steer with your elbows," and "That's a chili plant, not a break." You're heading to a market Chinampa, a larger plot where nearby families meet to trade goods, gossip, and snacks. And today, you're doing something very grown-up and a little bit shiny. You're trading tomatoes for obsidian. It sounds dramatic. Kind of is. You've got a basket full of small, deep red tomatoes that were harvested just yesterday. They're soft, slightly sweet, and bursting with flavor. The kind of tomatoes that make people write poems. You even tied a few chili peppers on top for flair. Presentation matters, apparently. The market is already buzzing when you arrive. Boats are docked along the Chinampa edges like shopping carts in neat rows. Women are unrolling reed mats and arranging bundles of herbs, baskets of flowers, jars of honey, and glimmering shards of black obsidian. Volcanic glass so sharp it makes modern steel look clumsy. Your guide waves at someone across the water and nudges you toward a woman with a stone-carved necklace and arms full of blades. "She's got what we need," she whispers. "But don't rush. Compliment her tamales first." You do as you're told, because you've learned that Chinampa trade isn't just about value, it's about relationship. You don't just say, "I have tomatoes, give me knife." You say, "How's your sister's garden? These grew fast because of the moon. Do you still use the 3 chili drying method?" It's half bargaining, half storytelling. And it works. The woman unwraps a cloth bundle and reveals 2 small obsidian blades. They're curved, glossy, and cool to the touch. Tools like this were used for everything. Harvesting, carving, cooking, even, according to whispers, certain sacred rituals. You hand over your basket of tomatoes. She nods once. Trade accepted. Some historians argue over how advanced Aztec market systems were, but they tend to miss the social glue of it all. The way trade wasn't just economic, but communal. It built trust, reputation, memory. You make another small trade, dried flowers for crushed amaranth seed cakes. Someone hands you a smoked chili wrapped in maize husk for the road. You're not sure if it's a snack or a prank. You take it anyway. By midday, your canoe is heavier with goods and lighter with tomatoes, and your heart is full in that quiet way that only happens when people share. Not just things, but attention, language, time. You paddle back, the obsidian blades wrapped carefully in cloth beside you. They'll be used to cut reeds, harvest roots, maybe slice fish. They'll live on the Chinampa now. And every time someone uses them, they'll remember. That basket of perfect tomatoes. That sun. That song someone sang across the water for no reason at all. Because trade isn't always about what you give or get. Sometimes it's about what you carry home. You're sitting cross-legged on a reed mat under a low awning made of woven palm leaves. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth and crushed herbs. Around you, a group of children are gathered in a loose circle, eyes wide, legs wiggly, minds clearly somewhere between curiosity and chaos. Welcome to floating school. Or, as your guide puts it with a grin, a classroom where the teacher sometimes has to fish the students out of the canal. Today, you're visiting a floating school for tiny philosophers, because Chinampa kids don't just learn how to farm. They learn how to think like a floating village. The classroom is a sectioned-off part of the Chinampa with a little shade, a few mats, and one very patient elder who sits on a log like a queen. She's holding a gourd, tapping it rhythmically as she speaks. She's telling a story about a frog who wanted to be a cloud. The kids are spellbound. You are too. Between the animal voices and the jokes about frogs burping rain, there's a lesson tucked inside. Something about humility, about knowing when to jump and when to float. After the story, they sing. The song is simple, bouncy, and all about respecting chili peppers, because, as the song says, even a small one can ruin your whole mouth. You're told the songs serve multiple purposes. To teach practical knowledge, like which plants are safe. To build memory through rhythm. And to pass on cultural stories too big to write down. Later, the lesson shifts. One child is handed a flat piece of bark covered in symbols, basic glyphs that represent maize, water, and stars. She traces them with her finger, reciting their meanings aloud. This is education by repetition, rhythm, and relationship. There are no tests. Just watching, trying, remembering. And yes, sometimes swimming in the middle of class. The elder sends one child to fetch a reed, another to count the ducks nearby, 5.5, apparently, because one's missing a toe, and a third to explain why the sun rises from the east Chinampa and not the west. His answer, because the east one has better flowers. You can't argue with that. Some historians debate how structured Aztec education really was outside of temples and noble households. But Chinampa kids learn everything they need to live in balance with their world, from planting cycles to star maps, from bird calls to rain behavior, and even the deeper stuff, like kindness, and timing, and the art of listening when the wind shifts. You watch one little boy carefully roll up a drying mat, tucking each corner with reverence. His sister helps him, not because she's told, but because that's what people do here. They help. The elder finally claps twice. Lesson over. Kids scatter, some into canoes, others back to their family plots, and a few into the canal for one final splash. You sit there a while longer, the gourd's rhythm still echoing faintly in your ears. Because school on the Chinampa isn't about facts. It's about remembrance. And the way learning can feel like floating. If the water's calm, and the story is good. You're standing in the middle of the Chinampa, staring at a tomato plant that is somehow growing sideways. Not fallen. Not wilting. Just confidently horizontal. Next to it, a bean vine has wrapped itself not around a stick, but around a neighboring squash plant, which, to be fair, looks totally fine with it. Your guide leans in, amused. Things grow where they want here, she says. And sometimes how they want. Today's story? It's all about the art of growing up sideways. Because on these floating gardens, nature isn't rigid. It's opportunistic, creative, and sometimes a little weird. You kneel beside the plants for a closer look. The soil is damp, rich, and a little springy beneath your hands. Everything here feels alive. Not just planted, but collaborating. You notice how the maize grows straight up, tall and proud. But around its base, beans climb like mischievous kids on a parent's leg. Between them, squash sprawls outward in a lazy sprawl, covering the soil like a cozy blanket. It's the Three Sisters method, and it's ancient, used not just by the Aztecs, but by indigenous farmers across the Americas. Each plant plays a role. Corn gives structure. Beans give nitrogen. A squash gives shade and weed control. It's agriculture that works like a family group, supportive, sometimes tangled, always functional. And on a chinampa, the dynamics get even wilder. You spot chili plants that have re-rooted sideways after being partially pulled by ducks. Amaranth growing out of the cracks between reed mats. Even one rogue tomato sprouting from the compost pile, full of rebellious energy. This is what happens when your garden floats, your guide says. The roots look for their own balance. And it's not just the plants. You meet a woman who grows moss on the shaded side of her plot to use as natural sponge. Another family trains flower vines to weave around their outdoor cooking structure, creating natural shade, and a pretty decent photo backdrop, if phones existed here. Even the willows, planted to anchor the corners of the chinampa, sometimes decide to bend dramatically over the water, their roots digging sideways into neighboring plots. It's all very dramatic and completely unbothered by the laws of symmetry. You ask if this chaos ever gets in the way. Your guide laughs. If you want tidy rows, build a dry garden. She shows you how to use curved branches as guides, encouraging vines to move in graceful arcs rather than strict lines. You help her tie a few bean stalks to a leaning stick, but within minutes, the plants are already twisting in their own direction. And you let them. Historians often admire the Chinampa system for its productivity, but rarely do they mention its flexibility. This isn't a rigid agricultural machine, it's a floating, living collaboration. You start to notice more little improvisations. A canoe paddle reused as a trellis. A squash blossoms blooming out of compost baskets. Herbs tucked between flower rows just because the soil felt right there. Nothing here grows wrong. It just grows differently. And somehow, it works. You lean back, soil on your hands, sun on your face, and let yourself wonder. What would happen if you grew sideways for a bit? Not off course. Just in a new direction. Like a bean vine wrapping around something unexpected. You smile. And let yourself drift. Just a little. It's late afternoon now, and the canal feels busy. Not frantic, just full. Canoes glide past one another, paddlers nodding politely, occasionally pausing to swap a chili or pass along a joke. There's music somewhere, a flute, maybe a drum, and someone's definitely cooking sweet corn because the air smells incredible. You, on the other hand, are stuck behind a boat carrying what appears to be 15 baskets of squash and a chicken with an attitude. Welcome to the one part of Chinampa life you weren't expecting. Canoe jams and floating traffic. Yes, even paradise has rush hour. It starts innocently enough. You push off from the Chinampa with your basket of fresh herbs, aiming to make a quick trip to a neighboring plot. But then you round the first bend and find yourself behind a flotilla of market canoes, all leisurely moving like they've got nowhere to be. You try to pass on the left. A teenage girl with a boat full of marigolds smiles and gently drifts in your way. You swing right. A grandpa with a fishing net waves you back with the slow, confident hand of someone who's definitely earned his canal seniority. You glance at your guide, who's lounging in the back of your canoe, totally unbothered. This is normal, she says. We call it Chinampa ballet. You're not sure if that's real or a joke. You also don't care anymore. Because now there's a boat behind you with two boys singing loudly about ducks. And just like that, you're in a full-on traffic snarl, made of vegetables, gossip, and floating stubbornness. But here's the twist. No one's angry. There are no horns. No shouting. Just raised eyebrows, shrugged shoulders, and the occasional paddle tap on the water to get someone's attention. It's all surprisingly patient. Because the canals are more than water roads. They're community threads, spaces where people move through and with one another. You end up next to a woman selling tamales who offers you one, unsolicited. You trade her half a basket of episode. The trade slows you down further, but now you're eating. So really, who's complaining? Some historians suggest the Aztecs had formal canal rules, right-of-way based on cargo size, elders getting priority, that sort of thing. Others think it was more informal, guided by respect, rhythm, and the unspoken understanding that everyone's floating on the same shared resource. Whatever the case, no one rushes. Not even the chicken, who is now standing proudly at the bow of the squash canoe like it owns the lake. You finally make it to a clear patch and pick up speed. Sort of. Just before turning toward your destination, a boy waves you over with a paddle. "Race you to the lily cluster," he says, grinning. You hesitate. Your guide sighs. Go on. But no cheating this time. You don't win. Not even close. But as you sit there afterward, legs dangling over the side of the canoe, panting from laughter and sun and too many near misses with reeds, you realize something important. The canals aren't just pathways. They're places where deals happen, where jokes are told, where stories are passed from one chinampa to another, floating gently in the air like mist. And sure, sometimes you're stuck behind a squash chicken caravan. But sometimes, you're exactly where you need to be. Even if you're moving a little slow. You're helping collect lily pads now. Yes, actual lily pads, from the edge of a quiet canal. Your guide insists they make excellent compost and also that some frogs prefer them, romantically speaking. You don't press for more details. But as you lean over to pull another cluster onto the canoe, you spot something on the neighboring chinampa. Two people, young, laughing too loudly, sitting very close under a tree draped in squash vines. You're not a gossip, but you're also not blind. Your guide notices your glance and smiles. "Ah," she says, "the floating gardens have a way of making hearts float too." Tonight's lesson isn't about maize or compost or divine calendars. It's about love stories in the lily patches. Because on these chinampas, where people live, eat, paddle, and weed together, it's almost inevitable that romance will bloom among the beans and chili bushes. You hear stories of courtship canoes, decorated with flowers, paddled slowly past someone's chinampa like a not-so-subtle hello. A basket of herbs, accidentally, delivered to the wrong plot. Shared lunches, teasing over tomato rows, and of course, notes passed across canals. You find one, actually, folded into a scrap of paper bark and tucked into a crack in a willow tree. It says, "Your voice sounds better than the birds. Come back tomorrow." A little cringy, but honestly, adorable. In this world, privacy is rare, but intimacy is everywhere. Floating gardens aren't huge. Neighbors are always close by. But somehow, people carve out space for quiet gestures and stolen glances. There's even a tradition, your guide tells you, where two lovers plant a shared chinampa together, one half tended by each. If they argue, they say the plants start growing crooked. If they're in sync, everything blooms early. You ask if that's real. She shrugs. Real enough for the plants. Historians don't record much about love on chinampas. You'll find pages on crop yields, calendars, and engineering, but not many on moonlit paddles or how to woo someone with your amaranth cake recipe. But oral tradition fills in the blanks. One tale tells of a woman who paddled out each morning to sing at sunrise. She said it helped her corn grow straighter. A man from across the lake fell in love with her voice before ever seeing her face. He waited 2 seasons before finally asking her to share a plot. She agreed, but only if he could cook. They say his tamales were terrible at first, but the corn never stopped listening. You smile at the story. Because here, love isn't separate from the garden. It's part of it. It grows with the beans. It rests in the lilies. It hides in baskets of herbs passed hand to hand. And maybe it drifts. Like pollen. Like song. Like a canoe carrying 2 people who think no one's watching. But of course you are. from behind your very respectable pile of lily pads, doing absolutely nothing suspicious at all. You push off from the bank, giving them a little privacy. The breeze smells like marigolds and someone's nervous energy. And as you paddle away, you think. Some gardens grow food. Some grow stories. And some grow hearts. The Chinampa is quiet this morning. Quieter than usual. There's no smoke curling up from cooking fires. No ducks arguing in the canal. Even the sun feels gentler, as if it knows today isn't about planting or harvesting. It's about starting over. Today, you're helping with something sacred, a little sad, but full of life. When a plot needs to be reborn, your guide stands beside you, arms crossed, looking down at a Chinampa that's, well, tired. The edges are crumbling. The soil is sour. The plants are stunted, struggling, and a little embarrassed to be seen. This one's done, she says softly, but not gone. And so, the work begins. First, you remove everything: plants, tools, poles, even the half-buried duck nest someone forgot about. You scrape away the top layer of soil, revealing mushy, matted roots underneath. It smells like damp socks and forgotten promises. But your guide smiles. This is the good part. Because here's the secret. Chinampas are meant to fall apart. Not because they're weak, but because they're cyclical. Like compost. Like stories. Like anything that grows with the earth instead of against it. You begin layering again. A fresh lake mud, dredged from the canal. A dry reeds from last season's harvest. Or a sprinkle of ash from the cooking fires. And then more mud, again and again, until the ground rises like bread dough left to rest. It's slower than you expect. And heavier. But not hopeless. You plant willows around the edges to root the new soil. You press your palms into the ground to feel its give. You whisper something you don't plan to repeat, just a little thank you, just in case. Your guide tells you that some families mark rebirths like holidays. They light candles. They play flutes. One family even throws a party every time they rebuild, calling it their floating new year. And the old Chinampa? It's not wasted. The removed soil is added to compost piles. The broken reeds are dried for fire. The tired roots are left to dry in the sun, skeletons of what once was, and reminders of what can be again. Some scholars debate whether this rebirth cycle was routine or ritual. But here, wiping sweat from your brow with a leaf and sitting cross-legged on brand new soil, it feels like both. Because a Chinampa isn't just a garden. It's a relationship. And sometimes, relationships need to pause. To rest. To be taken apart lovingly and remade, layer by muddy layer. You look around and notice the neighbors watching, not judging, but nodding. Everyone knows what this is. Everyone's done it. No one escapes the fall-apart phase. But everyone has the chance to rebuild. Later, as the sun begins to dip, you plant the first seed, just one. A single bean. Small. Round. Ordinary. But in this moment, it feels like the beginning of everything. The sun is setting in wide streaks of orange and purple, and you're back where you started. Sitting at the far edge of the Chinampa, feet dangling over the canal, the air just cool enough to pull a shawl over your shoulders. Your hands are dirty. Your arms are tired. But your heart feels like it's floating. Because tonight, you've reached the end of something quiet and remarkable. You're leaving with mud on your hands. There's a small, woven basket beside you. Inside it, one last chili from today's harvest, a squash blossom wrapped in reed leaf, and a piece of obsidian that catches the fading sunlight just right. Gifts from the garden. Or maybe just reminders. Your guide sits beside you, silently chewing on roasted amaranth and occasionally pointing out birds that don't seem real. One glides across the canal with a lazy grace you could never pull off in a canoe. You ask if she ever leaves the Chinampa. She shrugs. Sometimes. But I always come back. Out there, she gestures vaguely toward the world beyond the water. The ground stays still. I don't like that. You get it. Because here, even the ground feels alive, shifting gently with the water, pulsing with quiet work, forgiving your clumsy planting and applauding your first decent tamale wrap. This floating garden taught you more than farming. It taught you how to read the sky like a book, how to paddle with rhythm instead of force, how to wait for flowers, how to lose a duck and still find joy. And maybe most of all, it taught you that life doesn't have to move fast to be full. Historians will argue about the Chinampa system for years. They'll write papers, dig trenches, run soil tests. But they might miss what you felt here. That floating can still mean grounded. That community doesn't need walls. That something built from mud and reeds can last for centuries, not because it's strong, but because it's cared for. You reach down, scoop a little mud into your palm, and let it slide between your fingers. This place lives in that mud. In the layers. In the leftovers. In the love. Your guide stands. Come on, she says. We've got leftover tamales and no one to judge us for eating for. You laugh. You stand. You leave a small offering at the edge of the plot, a few flower petals and a quiet, thank you. And as you paddle away into the glowing dusk, you realize, you didn't just visit a floating garden. You became part of it. Now the stars are out again, scattered like seeds across a velvet sky. The water's gone still. The chinampas are quiet. The ducks have, finally, gone to sleep. And so have the people. You lie back now, wrapped in the memory of cornfields that swayed with rhythm, of chilly smoke and night watch songs, of flowers that floated and soil that whispered your name. Your breath slows. The canal hums softly. A paddle dips, far away. Maybe a dream just passed by in a canoe. And you remember how the ground here wasn't solid, but it never let you fall. How the roots grew sideways. How love bloomed in the lilies. How everything floated, but nothing drifted too far. The Chinampa still breathes beneath you, even now. So let your thoughts do the same. Let them float. Let them soften. Let them grow quiet. Because you're safe. You're full. You're exactly where you need to be.